in an attempt to destroy us. When we complete the changeover of the Middle East, when we cut the Iranian axis down to even further than we've already cut it, when we make sure that Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons, when we destroy Hamas, that will set the stage for an additional agreement with the Saudis and with others. By the way, I believe also in the Muslim world, because it's peace through strength. If we're strong, if we're victorious, peace will come, more peace will come, and it will sweep the day. I have no doubt about that.
Because the very first conflict the Bible tells us that we should be looking for, and which I believe personally, this is my point of view, is going to either mark the beginning or very close to the beginning of what we call the tribulation period. It'll be the launch point, really. But in Ezekiel 38 and 39, which forecasts a regional war, not an international war, a regional war between Israel and her neighboring nations.
Can countries like Saudi Arabia agree to normalization, as some Arab countries already have, before the establishment of a Palestinian state? Can they give some kind of commitment or concession simply at stage 2 or 3 of a ceasefire deal in Gaza?
In recent days, Riyadh has said it would not establish ties with Israel without the creation of a Palestinian state. But these news packages speak to how Saudi Arabians feel about the Israeli premier. Egypt and Jordan also condemned Netanyahu's remarks, with Cairo calling the statement a direct infringement on Saudi sovereignty.
And of course, there's a new timeline. President Trump is due to meet with major Arab leaders. First and foremost, the King of Jordan and the President of Egypt, and I think also the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia as well, and so forth and so on. And of course, you know, both Jordan and Egypt and the Abraham Accords, partners of ours, the accords that were brought about by President Trump in his first administration, they are partners that must be listened to, must be discussed with. We have to honor their fears as well and see how we build a plan that is sustainable for the future.
Sami, this is such an important question today. I think the elephant in the room, in every room, oval or otherwise, at the White House, is Saudi Arabia. There's no more important question facing U.S.-Israel relations today and moving forward, whether it's on phase 2 and phase 3 of the ceasefire, whether it's on the future of the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem, whether it's about the future of the region and the configuration and the new axes in the region following the war on Gaza. Saudi Arabia figures very high on each and every level.
And only under the leadership of President Trump do we see now a new idea come forward. And I say to all our neighbors, you have any better idea, please present it.
Now, there's a lot of talk about Saudi Arabia, peace with Saudi Arabia. And then you read in the papers, well, Saudi Arabia says yes, but they have a caveat. There needs to be a Palestinian state. Since when did the Palestinians become so important to the Saudi Arabians?
Well, we got the Abraham Accords because we went around the Palestinians. Because the Palestinians, whether they're Hamas or their competitors, the Palestinian Authority, they both want to see the end of Israel. The only difference is Hamas says, let's use it immediately by military means, and the other guys say, no, let's do it by lawfare, by the ICC. Let's put pressure on Israel to withdraw to these indefensible lines where we're 9 miles wide. President Trump says Israel's too small. You know, he cuts to the chase, gets right to the point. And he was just right. Well, we can't be any smaller. I mean, we're not going to have an organization that is committed to our destruction 9 miles from the sea. All they have to do is cut us in half and we're dead. So, yeah, that's something that may have been debated in Israel. But after October 7th, after the massacre, that's gone. Nobody's going to do that. Nobody's going to say, oh, just give them a Palestinian state. They just had one. It's called Gaza, under Hamas. That was an effective Palestinian state. What happened with that, you see? It was used as a springboard in an attempt to destroy us.
רבות דובר על סעודיה. הנשיא אמר להבנתי אתמול שהסעודים, איך נגדיר את זה, לא דורשים מדינה פלסטינית. מיד לאחר מכן יצאה הודעה של הסעודים שבעצם מכחישה את העניין ואומרים שאין התקדמות בלי מדינה סעודית. ואני שואל אותך, מדינה פלסטינית.
אלא אם כן אתה רוצה שהמדינה הפלסטינית תהיה בסעודיה. יש להם הרבה שטח.
האמת שאני לא שולל את העניין הזה.
Saudi Arabia's foreign ministry released a statement mentioning Netanyahu by name and stressing its categorical rejection to such statements. And now Saudi media has released scathing reports about the Israeli prime minister.
لقبه الصحفيون بالدكتاتور بيبي. قاد حكومة الاحتلال 5 مرات حتى تجاوز حكمه المؤسس لإسرائيل بن غوريون. استعان في خطاباته بمعلومات وصور ولوحات حتى وإن كان ما يقدمه محض كذب ودعايات.
And I'll give you briefly why it's so important for Trump in particular. Already we're talking about $600 billion to $1 trillion of investments in the United States. We are talking about potential deals on oil. And we are talking about Saudi Arabia being probably de facto today the most important country in the Arab world, because other countries like Egypt and others decided they don't want that prominence, if you will. And because no country will have greater say in what goes on in Israel, Palestine moving forward than Saudi Arabia. And there is no country that Israel wants to normalize relations with more than Saudi Arabia. So at the end of the day, the Saudis looked at what happened the past 15 months and they're not impressed. They are not impressed by Israel's performance, and they are terribly disturbed by its genocide. So even the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who was, I thought, at one point was ready to make a deal with the United States based on, you give me so much and I will eventually normalize relations with Israel if you make promises and concrete steps on the question of Palestinian state. He's no longer that interested because of Netanyahu's performance in the war and because of Trump's prioritizing Saudi Arabia. So I think there is decision-making to be made in Riyadh, and I think the Crown Prince holds the trump card, So in a sense, he doesn't have to listen to Netanyahu. He doesn't have to accept Israel's conditions or diktats. He doesn't even need to listen to Trump. He holds the trump card, and it's Saudi Arabia that needs to lay out its conditions. It has a moral and historical role today to play. Hopefully, it will play it for its own people's sake and for its own sake and interests.
In fact, the prophet Zechariah put it this way in chapter 12, verse 2. He says, I will make Jerusalem a cup of drunkenness to all the surrounding peoples. In other words, the idea of the drunkenness is they'll be so intoxicated with both a combination of pride and anger and bitterness and hostility. In fact, one of the prophets called it an ancient hostility that Israel's neighbors have against it. That I'll fill Jerusalem with a cup of drunkenness to all the surrounding peoples. And when they lay siege against Judah and Jerusalem. It's interesting because the word that's used here or translated surrounding in Hebrew literally means those who are in your immediate proximity. The people who live in the neighborhood around you are your surrounding people. And he says, I will cause them to lay siege against Jerusalem. And that's interesting phrasing, because what lay siege means is that we're not so much invading as we are harassing you and encircling you and trying to isolate you and separate you from everybody else and everything else. You see, if this conflict were fought today, Ezekiel's list of nations would likely be comprised of a coalition of, well, he talks about the people from the far north. We think automatically of the Russian Commonwealth of States. We know that Russia has been deeply engaged in the Middle East up until with the fall of Syria. Now the Russians have pulled out, and in large part because they are suffering such severe losses in Ukraine right now. But basically, there are a number of Commonwealth states that are all Islamic. But also, I think this will give the opportunity for the Antichrist that we read back in chapters 26 to begin to step on the world scene. And that, I believe, will mark the beginning of the tribulation.